maybe it's recency bias, maybe the buzz just hasn't worn off, or maybe this is really my favorite Evil Dead movie of the franchise. Evil Dead Burn. Let's talk about it. What's going on, y'all? It's Foos here, and today we're going to talk Evil Dead Burn. Now, fair warning to all y'all out there, if you haven't seen this one yet, stop this video now, come back and check it out later, because I am diving in with the spoilers on this one. So, let's go right into it. Evil Dead Burn, written and directed by Sebastian Vanicek, with stars Sahelia Yacoub, Hunter Dahan, and Tondi Wright. And this movie centers around Alice, who is the victim of an abusive marriage to her husband Will, who dies early on in this movie. And she is forced to go spend some time with his grieving family for the memorial and cremation and all that type of stuff. And her family's very much not, or Will's family, I should say, is very much not approving of Alice. They don't seem to like her at all. There seems to be some blame and some resentment even that's going on there. And the only people that seem to be receptive of her from her husband's family is his brother Joseph and his girlfriend Taya. And those two are welcoming to Alice. They invite her back to the family home after the services and everything like that, and that's when all hell kind of breaks loose in this movie. And we're presented with a lot of, family traumas that are going on here. There's a lot of issues that this family has, as well as a history that they have with the connection to the Deadites. There were a lot of research that the grandfather of this family was doing, and there's a lot of that comes into play here as well. But yeah, once we get back to this family house, it's just, as I said, all hell breaks loose in this movie. And you're faced with a lot of violence and just brutal, grim despair in this movie. This is just a brutal movie. For as much as 2013 Evil Dead was, every bit of everything that I just said as well, I think this movie might top it. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I think this might be my favorite Evil Dead movie. I'll give it some time to simmer and everything, and I'll think it through and all that good stuff, but as it sits right now, I'm pretty comfortable saying that it's up. If it's not it, it's definitely in competition for it, for sure. And with that being said, let's just go ahead and dive into all the positives on this one, because there's a lot to talk about. First thing I'll point out is I'm a big fan of the Alice character, and I kind of touched on a little bit of what she's going through there early on, but, victim of an abusive relationship, loses her husband, and is very much going through this conflicting emotion, as, that is her husband, she's lost and everything, and she's surrounded by his family that remembers this golden child that are all grieving and heartbroken, but she almost seems kind of disconnected from it all, as you could kind of imagine somebody who's been abused by this person might feel. So there's a lot going on, I think, with Alice in this movie. And as the movie goes on and she spends more time in this hell around, his family members and everything, she starts to grow less nice about covering up who Will really was and stuff. So there's definitely some growth that goes that way, and, her dealing with her own grief, so to speak, But big fan of the Alice character, just love everything about her in this movie. And Mia in 2013 was awesome as well, and I really liked her in that movie. Mia's getting a run for her money, I think, with Alice in this one. Huge positive there. Moving on, though, from her, another thing that's positive about this movie for me is this is definitely an Evil Dead movie, because the violence in this movie is just 100 miles an hour and just does not take any prisoners whatsoever. From the opening sequence of this movie, I'll point out a couple different moments that this was really highlighted. Opening scene, right out of the gate, we have these two guys, they're out fishing on a lake, and they're both taken out when the Deadites start to rise here. The first guy, he's casting out some fishing lines, they all start going haywire, pulling out, and then as this guy's going to turn around, these lines start coming back at him, and he gets hooked in the face in various ways. And it's not just caught in the sides of his face. No, they made an effort to make these hooks catch some of the most brutally uncomfortable looking places you can imagine. and then he gets kind of all intertwined and wrapped up in them as well, and pulled out into the water. His friend comes back. He'd wandered off for a minute on a phone call. Comes back to find that he's out floating in the water. Goes out to try to save him. Goes to pull him from the water as he's being attacked by something that you can't quite see in the water at the time. Pulls him out of the water thinking that he saved him, only to find that he's only pulled half of his friend back out of the water, which is just brutal. And then our remaining survivor is introduced to the Deadites and tipped overboard out of his boat to where he's then basically boiled in this lake, which is just a rough fucking thing to imagine. I mean, I can imagine being boiled in a lake. That's fucking rough. So that's our opening sequence of this movie. And there's one little fucking detail that just hit so hard watching this. When our second victim, who's been boiled, he manages to like crawl his way out, to the edge of the water, out of the, onto a bank. And as he's just kind of laying there in his last couple seconds, our Deadite rat comes from the water, and she's walking past and steps on his hand as she's passing by, and you just see the skin, just because he's been boiled, just right off of his hand. Awful. So I mean, that's one right there. And then skipping ahead a little bit to later in the movie, once our patriarch of the family has kind of the first one to bring the Deadite curse back into the house from the funeral home, and when shit goes haywire with him, they get him in a car and they're trying to take him, off, for some help, and he proceeds to come to in the car and attack Taya, who's driving. And this is just a brutal attack sequence in this car. Not even there's one moment throughout it that's like the one you really like. Everybody in the theater kind of gasped at the same time during it, and I'll get to that. But just the nature of his attack of her in this movie is just violent as hell. But then we get the moment where she's going to try to get out of the car, and he comes and he slams the car door shut on her and cuts off her fingers clean as can be. And man, that's just one of the ones you watch again and you get sympathy pain watching it. But that's another one throughout this one that I was on edge watching. It's just brutal. So the car attack scene, putting that in there as well. Then we get a scene where Joseph is forced to take out Taya, or Deadite version of Taya, let's say, and he proceeds to beat her face into an absolute pulp by the time it's all said and done. And wow, when you're sitting there watching, you're like, all right, how many more times is he going to be able to get away with hitting her? This is rated R, right? Yeah, just violent as all hell. And there's another sequence much later in the movie towards the end where Alice is kind of on our last minute chase, and she's being chased down by Deadite Susan and Edgar at this point, and she gets herself into a chimney, and Susan is coming to her from the top of the chimney. She's chasing her down, and she has this weed eater with the blade attachment thing going on, and proceeds to just saw her to oblivion while trapped in this chimney situation. And they get a shot of outside the chimney, and you're watching this shit just fall down as it's happening. It's okay, that's pretty crazy. So this one had some pretty damn cool scenes of violence in it, I would say. But as far as other scenes of violence, just of a more unique nature, I'd say, for me, and I know how some people get sensitive about this type of stuff, but look, I'm sensitive about this type of stuff in reality. In movies, and when horror movies are doing it to elicit reactions, I tend to be a fan of it because, you want a movie like this to make you feel something uncomfortable. At least I do. And so I am going to give this movie credit for giving zero fucks about some of the sensitive areas of violence. And the two that I'm referring to here are violence against animals and violence against children, which are not something anyone's a fan of, obviously. And you have started to see horror movies get a lot less sensitive about the violence on children stuff here recently, but it seems like the violence on animals thing is always one that's going to piss a lot of people off. And this movie didn't give a fuck. We get a scene in this movie where Edgar, who's our father that gets possessed by the Deadites at the funeral home and brings the curse into the house. When he kind of snaps and has his, like, moment, he ends up stabbing the family dog pretty brutally. And poor Max, he was a good boy. He didn't deserve that. But Edgar doesn't seem to fucking care, and he just obliterates the dog. And the dog ends up, getting the Deadite curse as well, which is kind of cool. We get a Deadite dog that's kind of roaming the house outside while everybody's trapped throughout this movie, which is a cool element to it, I think. But then later on, at the end of this movie, or you can't even really call it the end because this is kind of like a post-credit thing, again, spoiler there, that we see at the end of this movie where Deadite Ellie actually comes back in the funeral home and takes out a kid at the very end of this movie in pretty brutal fashion as well. And those two things there, coupled with, as well as the fact that I'll say overall, this movie just did not give a lot of shit for positivity. There's not a lot of movie or moments in this movie that give you a lot of hope or where you think things are really going to work out well for anybody. And I think that dreadful tone overall and just the movie having a no one's safe sort of vibe to it was a massive positive for me. The other thing I'm going to point out on the positives is I thought Tandy Wright, who plays Ruth in Pearl as well, and I thought was phenomenal in that movie. She's great in this movie as Susan as well. She plays the mother of this family extremely well, and she's got a lot of different, griefs that she seems like she's dealing with in her own way. She's kind of given up her own pursuits of happiness in a way for her family's sake, but is also claimed to be very happy to do so, but seems very much in denial of a lot of the issues that her family seems to have, and I don't know, she plays the character really well, I guess. I'm just a fan of the performance here for that one. And I thought she was great in Pearl as well, so she just, the only two movies I've ever seen her in, and she is 2 for 2 for me in a big way. But last thing I'll point out on a positive front here for the movie is I really liked the camera work that we get in this movie. And some of it's, I guess, unique to this one. Some of it's not. First thing, the shaky cam stuff that you see in a lot of the Evil Dead movies, we get some of that in this movie. I'm a huge fan of those shots. Just the fast moving, like demon POV, whatever you want to call it, the shaky cam, big fan of those in this movie and in all the Evil Dead movies. It's just one of those like signature shots that you see and you're like, I'm watching the Evil Dead. Also, though, we get a scene in this movie where there's just a chaotic sort of brawl sequence going on throughout this house, and our character Alice is kind of trying to evade it as it's going on. And the camera work that's done throughout that scene is fucking phenomenal. It gives you a real sense of like being in the moment of this scene, and you get on edge and tense watching it by the way it's shot. So I felt like that was an incredible scene. You kind of get a little bit of a tease in the trailer. That's part of what they put out there. And, they didn't spoil too much or anything. I'm not saying that. But that scene right there, I think, was done from a technical standpoint extremely, extremely well. And it really did, as cliche as it sounds, like a great job of putting you in that moment. And I know I said last positive, but one other thing I almost forgot here that we will point out on the positive. I mentioned this movie being just dreadful and bleak throughout and really not giving you a lot of hope for positivity. And while that is true, it's not all just misery. There is a good thread of comedic value that is done in this movie that is basically all hinged off of one character, and that's the grandmother of the family, who is, I don't know if she's dementia or Alzheimer's. I don't know what she's got going on exactly, but she's not all there cognitively, and as this movie's playing out, she is lost in the sauce, and it's a great little sprinkling of comedic value throughout this movie because she's absolutely hilarious. And I'd say if it weren't for her element being sprinkled throughout this movie, maybe there is a chance that it's too dreadful. I don't know. It's hard to say because we don't see it that way. We do have her basically expertly placed throughout this movie to lighten it just enough, I would say. So her and the way she's used are a huge positive of this movie as well. And I'm not trying to be, rose-colored glasses or just be, the promotion team here for this movie or anything. I'm really trying to be fair, but there really is not a lot that I can think of negative to say about this movie so far. It's a damn near perfect movie just off of first watch for me. If I'm nitpicking anything about it, as I watched it, there was one moment that I caught myself thinking, like, that's kind of... And that came when, late in the movie, Will, Deadite version of Will, Alice's husband, makes an appearance and is throughout the final sequence of this movie. And the look of Deadite Will, not my favorite part of the movie, I guess. He kind of almost gave me this, like, Deadite Terminator vibe or something like that. I can't explain it any better than that, and that probably makes no sense at all to anyone other than myself, but that's how I interpreted it, and it gave me kind of a little bit of a goofy vibe to the way that he looked at the end. I guess I maybe would have preferred something just a little creepier, and I don't know. It had like a Terminator or like a superhero type of thing to it almost. And again, I'm nitpicking right here because I don't really have anything else negative to pull from this movie. I really, really enjoyed this one. I'm anxious to check it out a second time. Can't wait to watch it again and kind of see if it sticks the same way or if maybe some time goes by and, it doesn't quite stand out the same. I don't know. Right now, though, this one is up to the top of the list for the Evil Dead for me. I absolutely love this movie, and I can't recommend it enough. Now, that's all I got for this one, though. As always, if you stuck with us for this long, go ahead and hit that subscribe button for me. Check out some of the other videos on the channel, and as always, be on the lookout for the next one. We'll see you.